Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 823B, and today's date is November 20th, 2015, and the title of this episode is U.S. More Concerned with Assad's Removal Than ISIS. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, out in Ukraine, the IMF is looking at Russia's proposal where they're saying, listen, what we'll do is we'll postpone the repayment of Ukraine's debt for 2016-2018 with installments of $1 billion per year. And the IMF says, okay, let's take a look at this and we'll make a decision. But Ukraine right now is rebuffing Putin's offer. Yatsenyuk is out there and says, we completely reject this. There'll be no restructuring proposal like this whatsoever. And we're not going to accept this from an aggressor state. They need to accept the same terms as every other bondholder. They want them to take a 20% reduction on the face value of the loan. And Russia right now is fighting back saying, no, we're not going to be doing this. And if there's no meetings of the minds between Russia and Kiev, Kiev is just going to default on it. And then the IMF is stuck in a corner here. I know they want to change their rules, loaning money to a country that defaulted on another country's debt, but they're going to hear a lot of complaints from other countries. So this really puts them in a corner at this time. Now, the OSCE out in Ukraine is saying that the violations of the Minsk ceasefire agreement have increased over time, and they are stationed right now in the Donetsk region, the special monitoring mission of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is watching what's going on here, and they're seeing continually shelling coming from Kiev, from the government-held areas. And they're saying that, yes, they have continually shelled, bombed the area, and they're violating the Minsk ceasefire agreement. And we realize that they're starting to pick this up now. And as we notice, we're getting closer and closer to the end of the year when this Minsk II ceasefire agreement expires. And I think at this time, with the United States in there, with the UK in there, and other countries in there, training the National Guard, the armed forces, bringing in weapons, defensive and non-defensive weapons, we can see at this point that they're getting ready for a major offensive. And it looks like they're really going to push it hard to try to start something. Now let me explain how this might go down. Because we're seeing reports that ISIS, which is the proxy army for the United States government central bankers, bought anti-aircraft missiles in Ukraine via Kuwait cell. Kuwait has uncovered an international cell that supplied the Islamic State with weapons bought in Ukraine. And we're seeing now that Ukraine is saying, well, we have no information on this whatsoever. Ukraine has not produced or purchased Chinese-made anti-aircraft missile systems, and which is meaningless because you can get them and smuggle them through Ukraine down into where they need them, and we've seen this done before. But the FN-6 anti-aircraft missile system has never been operational in Ukraine, which is absolutely meaningless also, because when you're moving arms, it doesn't mean you're using these arms. But what's very interesting about everything that came out here, Ukraine's Interior Ministry said that, on many occasions, the illegal arms trade in the country has been increasing in the southeastern area. And it has increased considerably, with 70% of the weapons coming from the area in the Donbass region. And they might have supplied the Islamic State with weapons. So you can see what they're building up to right now. You can see where they're headed with this. They're trying to make it seem like the southeastern people are part of this Islamic State terror group, which is the proxy army for the United States government and the coalition forces. But that doesn't matter. They're trying to convince everyone this is why this new offensive is going to be needed. and they're going to push this hard, and we're going to see it accelerate as we approach the end of this year. Now, it looks like we had another incident which involved a Russian bomber. Military sources in the UK say the British fighter jets have taken off from their airbase in Scotland to intercept a Russian bomber passing close to the UK's airspace. And they sent up the British jets to intercept the Tu-160 Blackjack, which is a supersonic bomber, and they escorted it until it was clear of the UK. Now, we know the Russian bomber wasn't doing anything in this area. We know this was done to make it look like Russia's flying very close to the UK to build up that uneasy feeling that Russia is the enemy. And look, they're flying another bomber. And we know they're bringing bombers in and out of where Syria is. They're flying it across the areas. And the US, the British, and every other country does the same thing. They were in international airspace, and it is not a problem. Now, the French military will be working with the Russian Defense Ministry. And this has come out after the false flag attack in France. And what we're seeing here is France playing both sides right now. They're nervous about the United States because we know the United States government, central bankers, are trying to bring Europe into a war. We know Hollande was out there. It's an active war, it's an active war, it's an active war. So he's pleasing the U.S. government, central bankers. On the other hand, he's working with Russia. And we're seeing a lot of this in the economies of countries where they're using the dollar, but they're setting up the bilateral trades with China, and they're setting up the clearinghouses for the yuan. Because all of these countries know eventually they're going to have to choose sides. And this is what we're seeing right now. And this is going to pose a problem for the United States. Now, what we're seeing is that there are a lot of things taking place today in Africa. We understand that 25 U.S. military personnel were in Bamako at the time of the hotel incident in Mali. We understand there was some type of terror going on there. And the troops just happened to be there. And basically, why were they there? Because if we go back in time, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta said Tuesday that the U.S. had ruled out putting any American troops on the ground in Mali. And they were hoping that the French will succeed in establishing better security for the West African nation. But what we're seeing is that the U.S. already had troops in the area, and they helped with the situation. Now, the question is, why is the United States in Africa right now? Why are we seeing these terrorist attacks? Why are they bringing troops into this area? Well, remember, wherever China and Russia are, that's where the United States is going to be. And it looks like at this point, the U.S. and the private Western Central Bank countries are trying to keep Africa out of reach from China and Russia. Because as we know, China is helping build their infrastructure. And if they keep using terror, it puts everything on a delay. It pushes the BRIC nations back, and it delays everything. Because the BRICS want to set up banks in this area to help these countries. And the United States is trying to stop them at all costs. And we're starting to see that the Islamic State is everywhere. And this is what we said was going to happen. Because we know the authorization for war allows the United States to go after the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, or any other terrorist group anywhere in the world. And this is what they really want passed. And we can see right now they're saying that the Islamic State might be sending dozens of suicide bombers to the Malaysian Asian Summit. And we have to remember there's going to be a lot of leaders there. The U.S., Russia, Japan, China. They're all set to gather this weekend. So we're going to have to watch that very, very carefully. And then we had alleged suicide bombers in Yemen. Now remember, Yemen, the Houthis kept on saying, Al-Qaeda is not here, the Islamic State is not here, it's us, we're the ones fighting. But we know the United States has been transporting the Islamic State from Syria into Libya and into Yemen. And there was a videotape that showed the bomb going off, but it could be anything because it was far away. And they can be using this to prove that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are in Yemen, which will help in the end because the United States wants to go back into each one of these countries. And what's very interesting is that in Yemen, they were reporting that it was Al-Qaeda, and then Rita Katz site intelligence said that the Islamic State took credit for all of this. So we can see what's happening right now is all the terrorist groups are getting involved, and their stories are crossing. Now, Libya, the puppet government in Libya, says Libya may become the new sanctuary of terrorist organizations, which is the Islamic State. And they are asking right now that they join the calls for international action against the Islamic State, just like everyone is doing in Syria and Iraq. How interesting how they want the coalition forces in Libya. They don't want Russia in there. They want the coalition forces. And we know the U.S., during the false flag in Paris over the weekend of the 13th, 14th, and 15th, the U.S. went in with F-15s and bombed inside Libya. Now Libya is making the call saying we need your help. But that's not the government. The government is in Tripoli. The puppet government is calling for this. Now we understand the refugee problem across Europe, here in the United States, is basically pitting people against each other, countries against each other. And this is what the agenda is all about. And there's many different agendas associated with this. In Europe, they want the Schengen completely done away with. They want borders erected. They want Europe to be in chaos. They want Europe to be fed up to go to war. This is what they're trying to do in this area. And they're saying that we're faced with terrorism. We shouldn't be letting the refugees in. We should be closing our borders. And everyone is pushing different agendas. And what we're seeing is a Soros-backed group launches a bid to keep Syrian refugees flowing into the United States. That's very interesting. And we know Soros has basically started many different coups around the world. He funds them. He organizes them. He did it in Ukraine. He did it throughout the Middle East. He tried in Latin America. And we can see he pushes all these different agendas. Now we have to remember, this agenda right now is to bring in refugees, illegals into the country to satisfy Obama's need to prop up Obamacare, to pump up the bubbles in this country. This has I know a lot of people think like, oh, this has to do with saving the people. But you have to remember, the United States caused all this. You have to remember, they're the ones who sponsored the terrorism and the wars throughout the Middle East. We have to remember, they had all the refugees funnel into Turkey. And there was a buildup year after year after year. And then they were told in Turkey that if we let you out throughout Europe, you can start a better life. It's already waiting for you. And they let them loose across Europe. And then Obama stepped in and said, okay, let the United States help. This is what he needed, because the illegals coming over the border wasn't enough. So they need more in here. And the second agenda for all of this is basically trying to create chaos and pit people against each other. Because once they have everyone fighting and getting fed up with this, they will ask them to join them in the war to stop all of this. But it's very hard because they're the cause of it. Now, out in Syria, Assad is out there saying that everything that is being done inside his country, they are coordinating all counterterrorism actions with Moscow. They're not coordinating with the United States, with the UK, with France, or anyone else. Again, we have to remember, Russia was invited into Syria. The United States invaded Syria. The coalition forces invaded Syria. Syria is a sovereign country. And they did this for one reason and one reason only, to get Assad. But the White House right now is losing their initiative in Syria. Things are falling apart rapidly. And we're getting reports that Obama has been blocking 75% of the Islamic strikes. Remember, in the beginning of all this, he was the one who wanted to pick out the targets, because he was getting instructions of where the Islamic State was and where to hit so they wouldn't hurt their proxy armies. And we know from one of the Pentagon sources who was working out in the field, this is absolutely true. Now, of course, they're saying, well, we didn't want to hurt civilians. We were trying to avoid civilians. Come on. That didn't work in Afghanistan, and they knew civilians were there. We know they gave their proxy army sarin gas to use on the civilians. Made no difference. We know the Islamic State was using chlorine gas. Made no difference. So that story doesn't work. Now, the U.S. is pushing this peace process really, really hard. They want peace in Syria. It reminds me of the Geneva I, Geneva II talks, when they had the Free Syrian Army, the opposition group, meet with Assad's representatives in Geneva to talk about him stepping down. And that was the only thing that was on their agenda. And the U.S. right now is pushing the same exact agenda. I mean, they were top diplomats from 17 different countries, and they're talking about a new framework, about a new constitution, holding elections, and of course Assad said, listen, yes, we will do all this as soon as we get rid of all the terrorism out of my country. But of course the United States is saying that, yes, we're getting ready for a transitional government. We're getting ready to remove Assad. And right now, we can see that this isn't going to happen. Assad is not going to step down. Russia's not going to force Assad to be removed. They've already said it time and time again. It is the people's choice. And the United States is not going to like this. The United States is then going to move to the next phase. And that is bringing more false flags to our doorstep, to push everyone into going into this war. Now, what's very interesting about the last false flag, which just happened on Friday the 13th, there are details coming out about the two suspects that supposedly were the masterminds and the assassins, the terrorists. And they keep saying that they're Muslim, they're radical Islamists. And then we come to find out that the Abdeslam brothers ran a bar in Belgium, used lots of drugs, drank alcohol, which is completely forbidden in Islam. Basically, they didn't attend any of the mosques, and they didn't really believe in the Islamic principles. So what the corporate media is telling us is completely opposite from what the ex-wife is saying, and people who knew these people. So what's going on here? We have two different stories right now. And the government story, you can tell, is complete propaganda, because we saw from the CCTV video, the person doing the shooting looked white, clean-shaven, and did not look like an Islamic radical person. And then we come to find out that Hossein Mortada, a Lebanese journalist and director of Information Centers for Studies and Documentation, reported the following. He provided details about one of the individuals who carried out the Paris attack on the 13th, and his name was Abu Tahala al-Jaziri. And they're saying that these people were French nationals. They've been trained in the occupied Golan Heights, along with his crew who carried out the Paris attack. He's saying that they were trained by Mossad. Then they were sent to France 6 months before the Paris attack to basically be the patsies for this entire false flag event. And you have to ask yourself a question. We know that France had security all over the place, especially in stadiums, concert halls. How did these people get inside dressed the way they said they were dressed? In black, with suicide vests on, wires hanging down, AK-47s. They needed some help from the inside. And we know the Bataclan was recently sold, and we know this was used. And what's very interesting about the Bataclan is that there was a concert going on in there. And we know when you go to a concert, you like to bring your phone, you like to take pictures, you like to have many, many different shots inside the Bataclan. And we're not seeing that much come out of there, which I find very, very interesting, because normally we see tons and tons of pictures during the concert, during what happened, and we're seeing a very little bit trickle in. Now we see the Islamic State is continually pushing terror, which we know it's not really coming from the Islamic State. And they're looking to blow up the White House right now. And they're going to say they're going to turn the White House black. And what's very interesting about this is that we've seen 2 movies about the White House being attacked. And I know the Islamic State mentioned this once before. But what is happening at this point is they need to make sure that everyone is on the same page here. That there is a terrorist attack that's going to occur. That it's going to happen in multiple places. And from Europe, as we know, they're saying that since the Paris attacks, this might hurt the European economy. Of course it's going to, because this is what they're using to cover up the entire thing. And here in the United States, this will be the last attack, most likely here in the United States. There might be other attacks throughout Europe, like we're seeing, to keep the fear going. But I'm thinking most likely they'll have another one in Europe and then bring it home here to the United States to finish it off. Because we saw this during World War II. The United States was pretty much the last country to enter the war. And they kept on saying, we're not going to be going to war, we're not going to be going to war. And then we had an attack. And it looks like they're doing the same exact thing again. Getting Europe all together, having them fight. Hopefully they can start a war against their fictional enemies of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria. And then eventually, if the United States, the people here don't budge, they can't get traction on that authorization for war, they will then bring the attack here to the United States. And this is where everything starts to really go south. This is when we will know the collapse is occurring. This is when we know they're trying to push us into war. This is when we'll know we definitely need to be ready and prepared for what is coming. Because when the lights go out, when there's no water, when there's no gas, when people are surprised on what's going on, they'll be running to stores, ransacking the stores, trying to get supplies, because They had no clue this was coming, and this will make it very, very difficult for people. But all of you who are prepared won't have to run around at that time. You'll be safe with your families. You'll have your families protected with a weapon. You'll have cash on hand, gold on hand. You'll have medical supplies, you'll have food, you'll have water. You won't need to go outside at this point, as it gets worse and worse as days pass. And this is why we need to be prepared for what is coming. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.